Good afternoon, all. I would like to thank Expertise France and the European Union for inviting me to speak about biodiversity and business, and above all, finance, because I will mainly focus on finance today. Business and financial sector are critical players in implementing and financing the necessary transition of economic sectors towards a more sustainable development in the economies and markets all around the world. But before speaking of the financial sector, why is it important to take biodiversity into account? The science is very clear. In terms of species loss, land degradation, deforestation, ecosystem loss and fragmentation, invasive alien species, impact of chemicals, scientists and also economists, as Professor Das Gupta in his recent review, are giving us a consistent message. We are undermining nature, and the consequences for local communities, societies, and our global economy are huge. And the figures mentioned in these slides and in many other reports prove this. I spoke of Das Gupta. In its review, he mentions that we need to transform our institutions and systems, in particular our finance and education systems, to enable these changes and sustain them for future generations. He also said that our global financial system is critical to supporting a more sustainable engagement with nature, and that governments, central banks, international financial institutions, and private financial institutions have also a role to play. So why is it important for financial institutions to take biodiversity into account? First, because they have significant exposure to companies with high or very high dependencies on ecosystem services through the loans, investments, and underwriting they are providing to them. That's what the Dutch central bank highlighted in a report published in last year. Second, because they are also highly dependent of nature, and that's what Finance for Biodiversity stated also in another report in 2020. And third, because as for the climate, they can be exposed to three main types of biodiversity-related financial risks, resulting of their impacts and or dependencies on nature. And these risks are physical risks resulting from nature loss, transition risks resulting from policy, legal, technology, and market changes, and systemic risks. And all this can lead to legal and reputational risks. The road is still long. In a recent report, the Portfolio Earth group, which is a group of NGOs and experts, mentioned that in 2090, the 50 world's largest banks invested more than $2.6 trillion in sectors which are primary drivers of biodiversity destructions. Finance for Biodiversity, which is a UK think tank, estimated that the value of nature put at risk by the lending activities of all development finance institutions amount to $1.1 trillion per year. But nevertheless, a lot is now happening beyond or in addition to climate change commitments and financing in the financial world. And it's also really important to speak about climate and biodiversity together because they are intrinsically interconnected. Several pledges, commitments, or declarations have been made last year and this year also, for example, at the UN Global Agency in September in New York, where a leaders' pledge for nature has been launched by 80 countries. Another pledge has been launched by 26 private financial institutions by the Finance for Biodiversity pledge. During the Finance in Common Summit in November in Paris, a common declaration has been signed by the 453 public development banks of the world, and there are Indian banks inside. During the G20 in November, also governments stated that they strengthen their resolve to conserve their marine and terrestrial environment in advance of the upcoming COP15. And also, during the One Planet Summit in January, several declarations and commitments have been made by governments and also by several financial institutions, and a coalition has also been launched for the convergence of climate and biodiversity funding. A part of these commitments, there are a lot of tools, metrics, data, frameworks, which are now being developed as the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, which is similar to the TCFD for climate, and which will allow the financial sector to disclose their risks, dependencies, impacts, and opportunities on biodiversity. And it will also apply for companies, private companies, corporates. Some countries are developing regulation, and there are a lot of webinar training as this one, for example. So based on that, what can be the role of the financial sector to align their flows, their financial flows with biodiversity issues? I see four, five main types of actions that could be taken in place, that could be put in place. First of all, manage the risk, dependencies, and impacts of their investments on biodiversity by adopting and applying standards and integrating these risks in the financial decision. Mobilizing funding for a pro-nature economy and leveraging new investments in new sectors as nature-based solutions, for example. For the Public Development Bank, helping countries for the development of an enabling environment to allow them to finance biodiversity. And finally, reporting and disclosure on the risk and impacts of their portfolio based on the TNFD, for example, or on other similar tools. What can the financial sector expect from the international context and from the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework? The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is a framework that will be adopted at the COP15 in this year in China, and that's similar to the Paris Agreement during the COP21 5 years ago. So the post-2020 GBF in its current version recognizes that urgent policy action is required at global, regional, and national levels to transform economic, social, and financial models. It will include a mission, goals, milestone targets, and indicators to achieve the 2050 vision of the Convention of Living in Harmony with Nature. Its translation into actions, policies, and regulations at regional and national levels will have direct consequences on how business and financial institutions operate and how they can transform their business models. Implementation of this framework will require an unprecedented mobilization of financial resources from all sources, the development of capacities at all levels, and the mainstreaming of biodiversity in economic sectors. And we spoke a lot during this presentation of the mainstreaming of biodiversity in the financial sector. So financial sector participation is essential to drive the agenda in a direction that is aligned with its experience and realities, and that is also sufficiently ambitious to achieve the level of actions the biodiversity crisis demands. And its implementation of the GBF will require the involvement of all public and private actors in all countries and of the financial sector, as mentioned before. So, perhaps more concretely, what are we doing at the CBD Secretariat with business and the financial sector? I just wanted to mention an initiative that was established in 2040, which is the Indian Business and Biodiversity Initiative. It is hosted by the Confederation of Indian Industry, and perhaps some of you are part of it. It's a very active initiative. It does a lot of capacity building events, develops special projects, and support overall implementation on the ground. And if you need, we can give you some information on that. Regarding the financial sector, we are developing a lot of actions now with the financial sector, and more precisely, one of them is to organize in June, the 17th and 18th of June, a workshop with financial sector with the idea to facilitate a dialogue among experts from the finance community, parties and stakeholders in order to build mutual understanding between these actors and the CBD community as a basis for stronger collaboration on the role of finance in the development and implementation of the global biodiversity framework, and to identify actions that could put the global financial sectors and governments and regulators on track to contribute to the objective of an ambitious post-2020 GBF, and also to identify commitments of parties within the framework that would be needed to facilitate this contribution most effectively. And that means goals and targets. So I hope that some of you or several of you will be able to participate to this important event. And with that, I thank you and wish you a very good seminar. Thank you all, and bye-bye.